What is going on? Let me plug in my mic here. That might be a better start. Test one. Hello. Here we go. What is going on, everyone? My name is Kyle. You're watching Buffalo Live, your one-stop shop for live professional play-by-play reaction to every Buffalo Bills game, plus some off-season discussion here. On today's episode of Buffalo Live, we have a breakdown of this year's, a few wide receivers in this year's draft class. And what I wanted to do was look at how well they are graded and compare their grades with a few guys from last year. And just kind of maybe see if that's any indication on what we will be expecting to see this fall. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I took 3 wide receivers from last year that were drafted in the first round, and I broke down how well they were graded and what their production was. Okay. The 3 wide receivers that were drafted highest were Jackson Smith-Njigba, Quentin Johnston, and Zay Flowers. So those will be the 3 from last year that we take a look at. And then I have a handful of guys that are current prospects, a few that I doubt the Bills will go up and grab, and then some that I think are more likely. So we've got Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, Rome Odunze, right, that top tier. We have Brian Thomas Jr., Adonai Mitchell, Ladd McConkey, Troy Franklin, and Roman Wilson. Okay. And I'm going to pull up a few things while I'm doing this here. Just wanted to take a look at, I wanted to have the Buffalo Bills depth chart right here in front of me. Doesn't look pretty in terms of wide receivers. No surprise. So starting right now, this is what ESPN has the Buffalo Bills depth chart listed as. Your starting wide receivers are Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, and Mac Hollins. And then, behind them, you've got Justin Shorter, Andy Isabella, KJ Hamler, and I'm actually, fairly happy that Andy Isabella is on the team. I'm excited to see what we can get out of Justin Shorter. He didn't play a snap last year. KJ Hamler, I think, was injured last year as well. Let's actually take a look. Sorry for this tangent here, but just want to make sure I understand, what we got right now. So, yeah, KJ Hamler played 3 seasons with the Denver Broncos, did not play a snap last year. I think he was with the Colts last year. So he has not done much to this point. And he came out of, Penn State, I think? Yeah, Penn State. So anyways, there we go. Here we go. First wide receiver from last year's draft class that was taken off the board was Jackson Smith-Njigba. Okay. Now I'm going to be taking a look at their scores by NFL analyst Lance Zierlein. He provides a ton of information on draft prospects. He gives pretty much every single one of them a profile. So this is what he had to say about Smith-Njigba. The overall score, and you know what? Let me pull up the legend here. We have a frame of reference. Okay, so this is a 8-point grade. So an 8.0 is the perfect prospect. And in the 7s is a perennial All-Pro / Pro Bowl talent. In the 6s, you have a very wide spectrum of, okay, this guy's going to be a starter. He has potential. He'll be a good starter in a few years. Maybe he'll be an average starter. Now we're talking about the bottom of the 6, 6.2, 6.3. And then down to a good backup with potential to develop into a starter. That's 6.1. So kind of like average guys are bottom of the 6. And then in the top of the 5.8, 5.9, those are your average backups or special teamers, guys that are going in, fifth, sixth, seventh round. And then 5.6 is bottom of roster or practice squad. And that's basically the bottom of the barrel. So you're looking at grades between 8.0 and 6 usually there. So for Jackson Smith-Njigba, Lance Zierlein had him as 6.43. This is will become a good starter within 2 years. Okay. 6.43. He had a production score of 77, athleticism score of 76. So both good scores. Neither of them is particularly great. Total score of 83. His comp was Jarvis Landry. Okay, now where was he taken in the draft? He was taken in the first round, 20th overall. He was the first wide receiver taken by the Seattle Seahawks. Now, what were the results? What was the fruits of the Seattle Seahawks' labor of taking this guy where they did? Well, he played in 17 games. Great. 628 yards, 63 receptions with 4 touchdowns. Now, how does that compare league-wide? His yardage was 63rd. Now, again, if you take the 32 best wide receiver ones on every team, you take the 32 best wide receiver twos, Jackson Smith-Njigba, according to his yardage, was within that. He was at the very bottom of 64 wide receivers in the NFL. Okay. So, pretty okay. It's not what you'd love to see for a guy you drafted in the first round, but at least he was relevant. For his receptions, as I said, he had 63 receptions. That was good for 50th in the league. So there you go. Now, how did he do on his team? Well, the Seattle Seahawks have 2 good wide receivers there already with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, obviously. So he was actually 3rd in all categories here, yards, receptions, and touchdowns. He was 3rd in all of them. But not too big of a surprise considering what they already have there. So that is Jackson Smith-Njigba. Keep him in mind as we continue on. Next guy, Quentin Johnson. This is the taller receiver who came out of, I think, TCU. He was drafted. Well, we'll get into his draft status later, but his profile, 6.39. He was a tick below Smith-Njigba. So his grade, as far as the phrase there is, will eventually be a plus starter. So better than an average starter, but not as good as a good starter, just a plus starter. 6.39. Production score of 80, slightly better than Smith-Njigba. Athleticism score of 66. That's 10 points worse than Smith-Njigba. Not the most athletic guy. He was comped to Alshon Jeffrey, great receiver for the Bears for a long time. He was drafted right after Smith-Njigba, first round, 21st overall, second wide receiver taken. And now let's look at his stats. He played in all 17 games. Good. That is step 1, right? 431 yards. So he was about 200 yards less than Smith-Njigba. 38 receptions. Almost half of the receptions that Smith-Njigba had, and half the touchdowns of Smith-Njigba. He only had 2. League-wide, how was that? Not great. 101st in yards. So now if we take your wide receiver 1, your wide receiver 2, and your wide receiver 3 that are usually on the field, at the same time, you go 11 personnel. If you have those 3 guys, times 32 teams in the NFL, that's 96 wide receivers. Johnson did not. Is his name Quentin Johnston or Johnson? That would be important to note. Yeah, I thought it was Johnston. Johnston is correct. So, he was not within the top 96 wide receivers in the NFL with yardage. He was 101st, and he was 113th in receptions. Not great. That is a, guy that is a wide receiver 4 on a team, right? Now, how did he do team compared to the other guys on his team? He was 4th in yards, 4th in receptions, and 4th in touchdowns. So, and he did play behind Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Joshua Palmer. I think those were the main 3 that he was behind. But Keenan Allen, as we talked about last week's episode, did miss 4 games. So, and actually, it wasn't Mike Williams that he was behind. Mike Williams only played 3 games last year. It was Austin Eckler had more yardage than Quentin Johnston. Yikes. So that is not the production you want from a guy you pick in the first round. All right, now we'll move on to Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers got a score of 6.46. That is better than Johnston's 6.39. That's better than Smith and Jigma's 6.43. He had the highest grade according to Lance Zierlein, and he was also deemed a good starter within 2 years. He had the highest production score and the highest athleticism score of 81, respectively, with a total score of 84. So he just barely had a better overall score compared to Smith and Jigma, who had 83. Flowers had 84. And where was he drafted? He was drafted, again, right after Johnston. 22nd overall, the 3rd wide receiver taken in the draft. Let's look at his stats. 17 games played, 858 yards, 77 receptions, 5 touchdowns. Right off the bat, you see that almost 900 yards. That's awesome. 77 receptions. That was good for 28th in the league. 28th in receptions. So that means he is a bottom tier wide receiver 1. And that is excellent. That's what you want to see. Zay Flowers was electric last year. He was quick with the ball in his hands. I didn't check out his yards after catch, but, on a team that, let's take a look at the Ravens, had OBJ, Mark Andrews. He established himself on his team. In fact, he was 1st in yards on the team and 1st in receptions, and he was tied for 2nd in touchdowns. So he was, he led the team in yards ahead of OBJ, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Nelson Aguilar, Rashad Bateman, decent weapons for Lamar. So, good player. Good player. I'm trying to think who he reminds me of. Not so sure. His comp that Lance Zierlein gave him was Travis Benjamin, who was also a small receiver in the league. Played with the Chargers for a while, played with the Browns. So, all right. Now that we have those 3 guys, let's look at the current prospects for this year's draft. And it's easy to see based on Zierlein scores that these guys are a tier better. At least some of them are. First up, you have Marvin Harrison Jr. Given a prospect score of 6.86, that is a year 1 starter. Not necessarily Pro Bowl talent, but this is not a guy who is simply going to be a good starter within 2 years or, has boom or bust potential. This is a year 1 starter. He will play every game or every down. You want him on the field. Production score, 96. That is the best of this entire wide receiver draft class. Athleticism score of 69. Not great athletically. His comp was CeeDee Lamb. And again, these comps are not what kind of production these guys are expected to have. It's rather just their play style. So I'm a huge fan of CeeDee Lamb's play style. I loved him coming out of Oklahoma. I thought he was the best guy in that draft, although there were a couple other dudes that were great. Let's quickly take a look at that draft class. Was it Marquise Brown that was also in that 2020 NFL draft? Jerry Jeudy was there. Henry Ruggs was there. Yeah, I remember that being like, who is the best wide receiver? Henry Ruggs got selected first, then Jerry Jeudy, then CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Reagor, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman Jr., Laviska Shenault, KJ Hamler, who's now on the Buffalo Bills, Chase Claypool, Van Jefferson, Denzel Mims. So anyways, lots of good guys, though, in that class. So there you have it with Marvin Harrison, a total score of 87. That's 3 points better than Zay Flowers. And, yeah, so next guy, Malik Nabers, LSU receiver, had a draft score of, and this is the best one out of this whole bunch, 6.86. That's also a year one starter. Production score of 96. My correction to Harrison Jr.'s. Nabers' production score is slightly better. His is at a 96. Athleticism, 85. Total score of 92. So this guy has the highest score out of everyone we're talking about. And his comp was Justin Jefferson. So, man, how awesome would it be to have a tactician, Justin Jefferson-like receiver on the Buffalo Bills? It feels like they need a guy that will be at that level. Plain and simple. Rome Odunze, 6.74 year one starter, slightly below Nabers and Harrison Jr., slightly lower production score, same athleticism score as Nabers, a total score of 91. So just barely below Nabers is Rome Odunze. He has a comp of Larry Fitzgerald. Larry Fitzgerald played on the outside for a long part of his career, and then towards the end, the Cardinals were able to find success with him in the slot. You know, as he kind of lost his speed, he was still able to hide his route tree very effectively. So they put him in the slot, and he did excellent there. So that's your Rome Odunze comp. Brian Thomas Jr., 6.47. This is where you see the next tier. Noticeably, the score is 6.47. Will become a good starter within 2 years. So now, as a Buffalo Bills fan, I'm thinking, all right, if we get a guy like this, kind of need to get another guy after that. We need to get a guy who, you know, has more boomer bust potential. Brian Thomas Jr., 6.47, will become a good starter within 2 years. Total score of 86. That is just below Marvin Harrison Jr., actually, who had an 87. That is a little bit better than Zay Flowers. It's better than Quentin Johnston, and a little bit better than Jackson Smith-Njigba. So there you go. It would be amazing if Brian Thomas Jr. fell to the Bills at 28. Doubt that would happen. You wonder if Bean will move up in the first round to snag Thomas Jr. And then if he's already spent that second rounder on doing that, moving up again in the second round to get one of these other guys we're about to talk about. So there's Brian Thomas Jr. Adonai Mitchell, 6.35, will be a plus starter. That is lower than Thomas Jr., lower than Odunze, lower than Nabers, lower than Harrison. Again, 6.35. Lower than Johnston, lower than Flowers, and lower than Smith-Njigba. So this is the lowest score we've seen so far is Adonai Mitchell. His comp was George Pickens. And I don't know if I like that comp because George Pickens is a monster run blocker, or he was at Georgia. I don't think Adonai Mitchell is that, but maybe as far as just route running and catching the ball, maybe that's just what he's getting at there. So, Ladd McConkey is next, a wide receiver out of Georgia, 6.40. Will become a good starter within 2 years. Very low production score, 69, but a high athleticism score of 90, total score of 80, slightly below Adonai Mitchell with the total score, but a higher draft rate. So I'm not sure how that kind of makes sense. But his comp was Elijah Moore. And Elijah Moore has done okay in the NFL. He played a lot of games for the Browns last year, but never really asserted himself over Njoku and obviously Amari Cooper. So far in the league, he's got 1,624 yards, which is good for about 540 per year. So, okay. Next up, Troy Franklin, wide receiver out of Oregon, 6.35 will be a plus starter. That's exactly Adonai Mitchell's score. So now you're starting to think like maybe one of these guys could fall to the Bills in the second round. Because, what are the odds that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wide receivers get taken within the first 2 rounds? I don't think it's all that unlikely. We can take a look at what happened last year. Last year's NFL draft, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 in the first round, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the second round. So there you go. Bills took Osiris Torrance in the second round, and they took Dalton Kincaid in the first. Okay. So maybe Troy Franklin's not there waiting for them, but maybe this next guy is Roman Wilson out of Michigan. Roman Wilson had a score of 6.35, also identical to Troy Franklin and Adonai Mitchell's scores. He has a total score of 78, which is the lowest out of all of the guys I'm talking about here. His comp is Marvin Mims Jr. Mims, with the Broncos last year, had a season totaling 377 yards, 22 receptions. Not a great year. However, he did play behind Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy and Greg Dulcich, but he was injured for most of the season. So yeah, he was fourth on his team in receiving yards. So yeah. So there you have it. Those are some of the top prospects in this year's draft. Curious what you guys think the Bills should do. We've seen so many receivers in the second round, fourth round, fifth round, like all these later rounds that have blossomed into great players. If we take a look at the leading receivers from last year, you have Tyreek Hill, who was not a first-round pick. CeeDee Lamb was a first-round pick. Amon-Ra St. Brown was a fourth-rounder. Puka Nacua was a fifth-rounder. A.J. Brown, was he second or third? He was second. DJ Moore was a first-round pick. So just within those top 5 receivers, 2 of them have been first-rounders. Brandon Ayuk was a second-rounder. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was first. He was first. Nico Collins from Houston with 1,200 yards was a third-round pick. Mike Evans was not a first-round pick. Amari Cooper could have been out of Alabama. Yeah, he was. He was a fourth overall pick. So those are your top 10 receiving leaders last year. You've got 1 first-rounder, 2 first-rounders, 3 first-rounders, 4 first-rounders. So I would not mind if the Bills traded back and got, if they were able to trade back and trade up, right? You've got that 28th pick, and you've got the 28 plus 32, 60th pick. If we kind of shrink those two together and take a Ladd McConkey and a Troy Franklin, even though I don't think Ladd McConkey would really fit in our scheme, a Troy Franklin and a Roman Wilson, just surround Josh with all these young receivers and let him spread the ball, let him decide, who he wants to throw the ball to, instead of we have to give Stephon Diggs 12 targets a game. I would prefer that, I think, to trading up to get a Malik Neighbors who has a chance of turning out to be a Jalen Reagor. And I know we don't like to hear that for those of us on the wide receiver train, but these everything I just read, it's all someone's opinion of the guy. These are not numbers that will translate into reality. Some of the highest prospect grades on people, they ended up being busts. So, the way I see it is diversify your bets. Let's take 2 guys, take 3 guys, maybe one in the 4th round, 5th round. I know my cousin Adam Pencil is big on Jamari Thrash, a wide receiver out of Louisville. Before he went to Louisville, he was with Georgia State for 4 seasons. But a guy who apparently was compared to Stephon Diggs with his route running. And I'm watching highlights of him now, and I do definitely see the stop and go that Stephon Diggs had. So those are your prospects. That's going to do it for this edition of Buffalo Live, your one-stop shop for live professional play-by-play reaction to every Buffalo Bills game, plus some off-season discussion to get you through this off-season. Please be sure to like this video if you enjoyed. Comment which of these guys you love, which of these guys you don't like, what you want the Bills to do. So many options, guys. Lastly, please consider subscribing to the channel. Working my way to a goal of 50 subscribers. That will help with the video quality. I'll be able to live stream on my phone rather than the laptop. Once again, I'm your host, Kyle. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching. God bless, and go Bills.